Left 2 boyfriends back home thinking that's the last thing I'm going to meet up with a boy.
Nobody in the studio moved, not a breath, not a whisper, because in that moment, at 79 years old, the woman the world thought they knew, the woman wrapped in rhinestones, melodies, and decades of a spotless reputation, suddenly leaned forward with a smile so mysterious, so electrifying. It felt like she was about to rewrite her entire legacy. Dolly Parton, America's sweetheart, the queen of country music, the icon who built an empire of glitter, warmth, and genius, was seconds away from revealing 7 names she had kept hidden for a lifetime. 7 men so legendary, their names alone shaped American music. 7 secrets so shocking, they could shake Nashville to its core. And then, with the audience leaning in, with the host frozen mid-breath, her voice, soft, smoky, carrying 50 years of unspoken truth, delivered the first blow. Honey, there are 7 roads I traveled, 7 men who saw a side of me the world never did. The studio lights dimmed. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, unsure whether they were allowed to capture a confession that felt almost too sacred to film. Dolly Parton wasn't teasing. She wasn't joking. She wasn't hiding behind charm or giggles or witty deflections. For the first time, she was ready to open a vault locked since the 1960s. A vault filled with passion, danger, romance, temptation, and the 7 names that would forever change how the world saw her. This wasn't a scandal. This was history. The interview had begun just like every other polished, predictable press session Dolly Parton had sat through in her 50-year reign. She was there to promote her newest album, talk about tour dates, share heartwarming stories about her imagination library, maybe laugh about her childhood in the Tennessee mountains. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, nothing that hinted the world was minutes away from hearing the most intimate confession of her life. But then the host leaned forward, not aggressively, not theatrically, but with the kind of gentle curiosity that feels almost accidental, yet somehow slices deeper than any pointed question ever could. He smiled, mischievous but respectful, and asked the question that would split the room open like thunder. At your age, with all you've accomplished, is there anything you wish you'd done differently? Any road not taken that still keeps you up at night? The air shifted. Dolly's eyes, those sparkling, playful eyes that had charmed millions, suddenly glimmered with something far more dangerous. A secret, a memory, a fire she had kept locked away longer than some fans had been alive. She tilted her head, that signature Dolly gesture the world adored. But this time, it wasn't cute. It wasn't coy. It was a warning that something unforgettable was coming. Her voice dropped into a whisper somehow more powerful than all her anthems combined. Honey, she breathed, there are 7 roads I took that nobody knows about. The host blinked. The producer froze. The room went silent, holy, reverent, suspended. Dolly Parton, the woman who had danced around the scandals her entire career, the woman who had built an empire on privacy and flawless grace, had just cracked open a door nobody even knew existed. She let the silence stretch, watching as every soul in the room leaned closer, captivated, terrified, hungry for the truth. And then she delivered the line that flipped Nashville upside down. 7 men who saw a side of me that never made it into the songs. 7 men, 7 artists, 7 legends, not rumors, not fantasies, not tabloid inventions, but real names, real intimacies, real history. And she was finally ready to speak them, She let the moment breathe, letting the tension coil tighter, letting the silence thicken until even the cameras seemed afraid to blink. And then, with a slow, sultry smile, Dolly parted her lips and let the first name fall into the room like honey dripping from a warm jar. Kenny Rogers. The host nearly choked. The crew stiffened. Someone in the back audibly gasped. Dolly didn't flinch. Her smile deepened, warm, nostalgic, and undeniably mischievous. That voice of his wasn't the only thing that was smooth, she said, her tone sparkling with memories that were far from innocent. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting into the past, to smoky studios, dim hotel lounges, and nights when two of country music's greatest icons were more than just duet partners. Everyone had speculated for decades, fans whispered, journalists hinted. Their chemistry on stage burned too brightly, their laughter backstage felt too intimate, their duets too effortlessly sensual. But nobody ever had proof. Until now, Dolly lowered her voice, turning her confession into a velvet secret. People always wondered if there was something between us, and honey, there was everything between us. She explained how their late nights in recording studios weren't always about harmonies or microphones or perfect takes. Sometimes they were about discovering entirely different rhythms, ones that had nothing to do with music. She described the way Kenny looked at her, steady, warm, consuming, a gaze that made the rest of the world melt into soft, irrelevant background noise. When he sang to you, she murmured, it felt like he was singing through you, like his voice wrapped around your soul and pulled you somewhere you'd never been before. The host swallowed hard. The room tightened again, and Dolly kept going. She recalled nights in Las Vegas, after shows that left crowds roaring for more, when she and Kenny would slip away to his suite under the excuse of working on arrangements. But the only arrangement that mattered was how perfectly their bodies fit together once the door clicked shut behind them. She laughed softly as she remembered his low, rumbling laugh, a sound so deep it could make her knees weak from across the room. Up close, it was devastating, irresistible, dangerous in the most delicious way. By the time she finished recounting her nights with Kenny Rogers, the entire studio was entranced, caught between shock, awe, and pure disbelief. And yet, Dolly still wasn't done. She took a slow breath, straightened her posture, and let her smile return. A smile that warned the storm had only begun. Now, she whispered, the second name. Dolly let Kenny's name settle in the air like smoke from a long burning fire. Then, with a slow inhale, as if she were preparing to open another sealed chapter of her soul, she smiled again. A different smile this time, wilder, sharper, a smile that carried storms. Chris Christopherson, she finally said. And with those two words, the temperature in the room shifted. If Kenny Rogers was a smooth whiskey, Chris Christopherson was lightning in a bottle. Her eyes flickered with memories far more intense, as if she were reliving every spark, every jolt, every dangerously charged moment with him. Now that man, she murmured, was poetry in motion. And I'm not just talking about his songwriting. Everyone leaned in. Chris Christopherson wasn't just a musician. He was a Rhodes Scholar, a former Army Ranger, a man who abandoned a secure military career because something inside him burned too fiercely to ignore, a man who lived on instinct, passion, and raw intensity. And that intensity, Dolly admitted, was impossible to resist. Being around Chris, she said softly, felt like dancing with lightning. You knew you might get burned, but you stepped closer anyway. She recalled how Chris had a way of looking into you, not at you, as if he were reading chapters of your life you hadn't even dared to open. His presence alone felt like a promise. His touch, something close to religion. Their time together was brief, but Lord, it was unforgettable. A flash fire that started without warning, burned hotter than reason, and ended before either of them truly wanted it to. He touched you, Dolly whispered, like he was discovering something sacred. A hand on your shoulder felt profound. A goodnight kiss felt like a vow. The host shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether he was hearing forbidden scripture or a memory too beautiful for the world to deserve. Dolly continued. Chris didn't just write about heartbreak and redemption. He lived it. And for a little while, he let me live it with him. She described late-night conversations by candlelight, the kind that felt like confessions, carved directly out of the soul. Moments where passion and pain intertwined until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. It wasn't messy, it wasn't scandalous, it was poetry. Pure, dangerous, unforgettable poetry. And when she finished speaking his name, she exhaled, slowly, deeply, as if letting go of a storm that had lingered in her heart for decades. Then she straightened, looked right into the host's eyes, and said, with a voice full of quiet thunder, "Now, the third name might surprise you. Porter Wagoner, mentor, partner, legend, and far more than the world ever realized." If the room had been hot before, now it turned electric, because the third name Dolly spoke wasn't just shocking, it was historic. She took a breath, her expression softening into something complicated, a mixture of nostalgia, pain, gratitude, and a hint of lingering fire. Then she finally said it, Porter Wagoner. A stunned silence slammed into the room. The mentor, the man who discovered her, the man who gave her her first true platform, her longtime duet partner, her professional opposite, and sometimes her professional enemy. Nobody, not even the most dedicated country music historians, expected this name to appear on her list of 7. Dolly let the surprise linger for a moment before she continued. My mentor, my partner, the man who gave me my start, she said softly. Porter was so much more than the world ever knew. He saw something in me before I even knew it existed. But what she said next sent shockwaves through country music history. And honey, he explored every inch of that something. The host stiffened. A producer whispered, "Oh my God." Even the cameraman paused his movement, because the Dolly Porter relationship had always been shrouded in rumors, arguments, lawsuits, dramatic separations, and a heartbreakingly complicated friendship. But never, not once, had Dolly revealed the truth behind their private chemistry. Until now, she explained that their relationship had always been intense, full of friction, passion, and clashing ambitions. Everyone saw their professional tensions, their fiery duets, their eventual split, but very few understood the real source of that intensity. Porter awakened things in me, she said quietly, that no mountain girl from Tennessee had any business feeling. Her voice shifted, almost trembling between desire and regret. She described how Porter's confidence, that rhinestone-covered, swagger-filled showman confidence, didn't fade when the cameras turned off. If anything, it intensified. Behind closed doors, Porter didn't just teach her how to command a stage. He taught her how to command parts of herself she hadn't discovered yet. He was demanding, she admitted, passionate, a man who took what he wanted with the same certainty he wore those rhinestone suits. She paused, letting the weight of that confession settle, but then her tone softened, became tender, heartbreaking, because Porter was also the man she eventually had to walk away from, publicly and privately. The lawsuits, the messy split, the hurt feelings that lasted years. But now we knew why it hurt so deeply. Porter taught me, she whispered, that you can love someone and still need to walk away from them. Sometimes breaking your own heart is the only way to save your soul. The room didn't breathe, the host didn't blink, and Dolly, sensing the emotional gravity, lifted her chin slightly and said, "Now buckle up, honey. The next name carries a whole different kind of heat. Glenn Campbell, the guitar prodigy, the golden boy, and the man whose touch could make you forget your own name." When Dolly whispered the next name, her smile changed, turning softer, sweeter, as if the memory itself still warmed her from the inside. She let the anticipation build for just a heartbeat, then finally revealed Glenn Campbell. Immediately, the room reacted, but not with shock this time. This revelation came with a different energy, curiosity, wonder, a sense that this story belonged to a different chapter of her life, a chapter dressed in sunlight rather than shadows. Dolly touched her chest lightly as though feeling a warmth that still lingered after decades. "That guitar of his," she said with a soft laugh, wasn't the only instrument he knew how to play. Her cheeks flushed with a glow half innocent, half mischief. Then she went deeper. Glenn Campbell wasn't like the others. He was a storm of talent wrapped in pure California charm. The Arkansas boy who found himself glowing under Hollywood lights. Those blue eyes of his, Dolly said, they could catch you like a beam of sunshine, holding you still, softening every hardened corner inside you. When Glenn looked at you, she whispered, it felt like being caught in the sun. She talked about how his confidence was effortless, not loud, not showy, but the kind that came from years of being the man behind the music before becoming a star in his own right. He had played backup for the greatest artists of the era. But with Dolly, he wasn't backing anyone up. He was leading, and she followed willingly. She described evenings between tours, stolen pockets of time in quiet hotel rooms and half-lit backstage corners where everything felt fleeting and forbidden and somehow more precious because of it. Sometimes he'd bring his guitar, he'd sit beside her on a hotel bed, strumming gentle chords while she hummed along, a moment that looked innocent to anyone passing by. But inside the room, inside that moment, there was a heat that had nothing to do with harmonies. Those fingers, she said, the edges of her smile turning wicked, could make magic happen on strings or on skin. The host inhaled sharply. The audience sat frozen. She shared how Glenn had this way of making even the most ordinary space, a bland hotel room, a tour bus corner, feel like a personal paradise. Just a guitar, two voices, and a chemistry that wrapped around them like warm velvet. He made everything seem possible, Dolly said softly, every dream right within reach. It wasn't long, it wasn't scandalous, it wasn't destructive, but it was beautiful. A golden chapter carved into a chaotic life. And when she finished speaking his name, her expression shifted, because the next one wasn't a sunshine. The next one was wildfire. She leaned in, her smile turning playful and dangerous. Now, honey, the fifth name, that outlaw knew exactly how to break every rule. Waylon Jennings, intensity. rebellion, temptation on two legs. Dolly's smile sharpened, turning into something wild, something that flickered like firelight. Because the next name was not gentle, not tender, not poetic. The next name was a storm in human form. She let it hang for a moment, as if even she needed a breath before saying it. Then, with a mischievous laugh that hinted at pure danger, Waylon Jennings. The entire room reacted. A couple of the staff members exchanged looks, half fear, half fascination, because Waylon wasn't just a musician. He was an outlaw, a rule breaker, a man who walked through Nashville like a cigarette spark on gasoline-soaked floors. Dolly's eyes glittered with memory. Now that outlaw, she said, knew how to break all the rules, including the ones about keeping your hands to yourself. Her laugh was low, warm, wicked. This wasn't a story about soft, lingering touches or candle-lit harmonies. This was a different kind of heat. Waylon Jennings carried danger in his voice, rebellion in his posture, and temptation in every step he took. He didn't ask. He didn't hint. He didn't charm. He claimed. With Waylon, Dolly said, there were no games, no pretending, no sweet talk. He wanted what he wanted, and he took it. Waylon represented everything traditional Nashville tried to hide: raw intensity, reckless passion, a refusal to follow anyone's rules but his own, and it showed in everything he did, including the way he loved. Being with Waylon, she continued, felt like surviving a beautiful storm. Their encounters were wild, unpredictable, the kind that left her breathless, not always knowing whether she should run from him or toward him. His voice, deep, rough, almost dangerous, could whisper promises that made her pulse race before she even realized she'd stepped closer. He didn't bring flowers, he didn't write poems. No, Waylon seduced with intensity, with that outlaw energy that made you feel like you were doing something wrong, and loving every second of it. And Dolly admitted something rare, that with Waylon Jennings, breaking the rules felt like the most natural thing in the world. When she finished recounting her moments with the outlaw, she let out a slow, steady exhale, the way a person does when they've finally walked out of a wildfire. Then she looked up, eyes softer now, as though preparing to open a gentler place in her heart. The sixth name, she whispered, he loved differently, tender, deep, with a soul older than his years. Willie Nelson, sweet, slow burning, comforting as a warm sunrise. After the wildfire that was Waylon Jennings, Dolly's entire demeanor changed. Her shoulders softened, her voice gentled. Her smile warmed in a way that hinted at a different kind of intimacy, the kind that doesn't burn but heals. She inhaled slowly, her expression full of genuine affection, and finally spoke the next name, Willie Nelson. Immediately, everyone in the room felt a shift. This wasn't danger. This wasn't electricity. This wasn't rebellion. This was tenderness, pure, unfiltered, soul-deep tenderness. Dolly's voice dropped to a soft murmur. Sweet Willie, with his braids and his gentle ways. She paused, smiling at a memory that clearly lived in a sacred corner of her heart. That man could love you so thoroughly you'd forget there was ever a time before him. Willie Nelson wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the kind of man who commanded a room by force. He commanded it by soul. He carried a warmth inside him, the warmth of sunsets, old love songs, stories whispered over campfires. He was a man who lived many lives, felt many sorrows, and distilled all of it into a depth that made being around him feel like returning to someplace familiar, even if you'd never been there before. Dolly described the way his hands, weathered from years of guitar strings, could touch you like you were something precious. Not a conquest, not a secret, but a treasure. When Willie loved you, she said softly, he didn't rush, didn't push, didn't demand. He just let you be. And somehow that made you want him even more. Their connection wasn't built on ambition or rebellion or passion that burned too hot to contain. It was built on friendship, on shared laughter, on the quiet understanding that sometimes the softest love is the deepest. Dolly recalled moments in dimly lit rooms where Willie would hum after, his voice low and melodic, tiny melodies that she later heard woven into songs the entire world would sing. But back then, they belonged only to her. Those braids of his, she said with a blush, weren't just a trademark. They gave you something to hold on to in the dark. She let the room absorb the sweetness of her confession about Willie Nelson, the man who left tenderness lingering long after he left the room. Then she slowly straightened up, her expression shifting once more, softer than the fire of Waylon, gentler than the sunshine of Glenn, deeper than the poetry of Chris. But now, the final name was coming, and it wouldn't be soft, it wouldn't be tender, it would be thunder. Dolly exhaled, her voice dropping into something dark, intense, almost reverent. Now, honey, she whispered, the seventh name, that one carries storms. Johnny Cash, the man in black, intensity wrapped in darkness. When Dolly prepared to speak the final name, the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't just another country legend. This wasn't sunshine, tenderness, hey mot ku noi lon mi hog. This was the man in black, a figure so iconic his very presence bent the air around him. Dolly lowered her gaze for a moment, as if gathering the strength from decades-old memories. Memories carved in fire, shadow, and a kind of desire that felt forbidden even in the retelling. Then she said it, quietly, deliberately, with a weight that rolled through the room like thunder. Johnny Cash. No one moved, no one even blinked, because if the previous 6 names were shocking, this one was earth-shattering. Johnny, the storm wrapped in a human body, the voice that rumbled with sin and sorrow, the man whose very existence felt like standing too close to the edge of a cliff. Dolly's expression softened into something dangerous and heartbreakingly intimate. Johnny was intensity wrapped in darkness, she murmured. A man who carried storms in his soul and somehow made them beautiful. She painted the room a picture of him, his presence filling every corner before he even spoke, his eyes dark, haunted, endlessly deep, pulling you toward him like gravity, his voice, that impossible velvet dark voice, turning confession into seduction, pain into poetry. He was not safe, not steady, not simple. He was living fire. And Dolly admitted the truth everyone suspected, but no one ever confirmed. Being with Johnny, she said, was like dancing on the edge of a cliff, thrilling, dangerous, unforgettable. Their encounters, she revealed, were rare. Fleeting moments that happened in the shadows between his battles with himself and his tumultuous relationship with June Carter. But when they happened, they were explosive. Johnny Cash didn't love halfway, he didn't touch halfway, he didn't feel halfway. He carried guilt and passion in equal measure, burning hot enough to consume everything in their path. He loved hard because he hurt hard, she whispered. And stepping into that storm was both terrifying and intoxicating. Dolly described how he could see into your darkest corners, not judging, not flinching, because he'd been to darker places himself. He understood brokenness. He understood desire. He understood the parts of people they tried to hide from the world. And somehow, that understanding made him irresistible. By the time she finished speaking his name, the room felt heavier, as if everyone had just witnessed a confession that should never have left the shadows. Johnny Cash wasn't just the last name on her list. He was the exclamation point, the storm, the danger, the unforgettable final note in a song she had held inside for decades. Dolly leaned back, her voice turning soft, almost tender. "Those 7," she said quietly, "they shaped who I became." When the name Johnny Cash finally left Dolly's lips, there was no applause, no murmuring, just a heavy, reverent silence settling over the room like velvet. 7 names, 7 legends, 7 chapters she had kept locked away for decades. But as the shock subsided, a different expression washed over Dolly's face. One softer, deeper, free from the mischief and fire she'd carried through her confessions. This time, she looked almost peaceful. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into an intimate whisper, as though she were speaking not to a studio audience, but to a single trusted friend. "You know, honey," she said gently, "there's something about those 7 that people need to understand. These weren't scandals, they weren't mistakes. They weren't the kind of secrets you bury because you're ashamed. They were sacred. These weren't just flings or moments of weakness," she continued. "These were connections that shaped who I became as a woman and as an artist." She explained that each man taught her something different. Kenny taught her warmth, Chris gave her poetry, Porter taught her power and heartbreak. Glenn brought her sunlight. Waylon taught her how to break every rule. Willie gave her tenderness. And Johnny taught her depth and the estranged haunting beauty of human darkness. 7 men, 7 lessons, 7 pieces of the woman the world eventually crowned a legend. The real reason she never told the world. The host finally found his voice, struggling to process what he'd heard. He stammered out the question, hovering in everyone's mind. "Dolly, are you saying all of these relationships were kept completely secret?" Dolly smiled softly, a slow, knowing smile that carried decades of wisdom. "Secret isn't the right word, sugar," she replied. "Private is better." And then she explained something that felt like a glimpse into a lost era. Back then, before social media, paparazzi swarms and 24-hour gossip cycles, artists still had something precious, something nearly extinct now: privacy. "We had the ability to be human beings first," she said, "and public figures second." Those moments with the 7 men weren't hidden out of fear or scandal. They were protected because they mattered. These men, these moments, they were sacred to me. Her fingers gently traced the arm of her chair as her gaze drifted somewhere far beyond the studio, back to hotel balconies at sunrise, candlelit poetry, stolen harmonies, and the storms made of pure emotion. Her final words. The room didn't feel like a studio anymore. It felt like a confessional, a place where the truth had finally been set free. Dolly leaned back, a serene calm settling over her like someone who had just unburdened her soul after carrying its weight for nearly 60 years. Then, with a gentle smile, "At 79, she said softly, "I think I've earned the right to tell my truth." Her final words were quiet, but they rang through the room with the kind of power only a true icon could possess. Real icons, honey, they live fully, they love deeply, and when they're ready, They tell their stories without apology. 7 names, 7 memories, 7 secrets that didn't diminish her. They made her shine brighter than ever. Dolly Parton